The reactive mind is very rugged. It would have to be in order to stand up to the pain waves which knock out other sentients in the body. It is not very refined, but it is most awesomely accurate. It possesses a low order of computing ability, an order which is sub-moron, but one would expect a low order of ability from a mind which stays in circuit when the body is being crushed or fried. The reactive bank does not store memories as we think of them. It stores engrams. The word engram in Dianetics is used in its severely accurate sense as a definite and permanent trace left by a stimulus on the protoplasm of a tissue. It is considered as a unit group of stimuli impinged solely on the cellular being. These engrams are a complete recording, down to the last accurate detail, of every perception present in a moment of partial or full unconsciousness. They are just as accurate as any other recording in the body, but they have their own force. They are like phonograph records or motion pictures, if these contained all perceptions of sight, sound, smell, taste, organic sensation, etc. The difference between an engram and a memory, however, is quite distinct. An engram can be permanently fused into any and all body circuits and behaves like an entity. In all laboratory tests on these engrams, they were found to possess inexhaustible sources of power to command the body. No matter how many times one was reactivated in an individual, it was still powerful. Indeed, it became even more able to exert its power in proportion to its reactivation. The only thing which could even begin to shake these engrams was the technique which developed into Dianetic therapy, which will be covered in full in the third section of this volume. This is an example of an engram. A woman is knocked down by a blow. She is rendered unconscious. She is kicked and told she is a faker, that she is no good, that she is always changing her mind. A chair is overturned in the process. A faucet is running in the kitchen. A car is passing in the street outside. The engram contains a running record of all these perceptions: sight, sound, tactile, taste, smell, organic sensation, kinetic sense, joint position, thirst record, etc. The engram would consist of the whole statement made to her when she was unconscious. The voice tones and emotion in the voice, the sound and feel of the original and later blows, the tactile of the floor, the feel and sound of the chair overturning, the organic sensation of the blow, perhaps the taste of blood in her mouth, or any other taste present there, the smell of the person attacking her, and the smells in the room, the sound of the passing car's motor and tires, etc. These would all be considered something on the order of a positive suggestion. But there is something else here which is new, something which is not in the standard banks, except by context: pain and painful emotion. These things are what make the difference between the standard banks and the reactive engram banks: physical pain and painful emotion. Physical pain and painful emotion are the difference between an engram, which is the cause of aberration, all aberration, and a memory. In Dianetics, a memory is considered to be any concept or perceptions stored in the standard memory banks which is potentially recallable by the eye. A scene beheld by the eyes and perceived by the other senses becomes a record in the standard memory banks, and later may be recalled by I for reference. We all have heard that bad experience is helpful to living, and that without bad experience man never learns. This may be very, very true, but it doesn't embrace the engram. That isn't experience. That is commanded action. Perhaps before man had a large vocabulary, these engrams were of some use to him. They were survival in ways which will be developed later. But when man acquired a fine homonymic, words that sound the same but mean different things, language, and indeed when he acquired any language, these engrams were much more a liability than a help. And now, with man well evolved, these engrams do not protect him at all, but make him mad, inefficient, and ill. The proof of any assertion lies in its applicability. When these engrams are deleted from the reactive mind bank, rationality and efficiency are enormously heightened, health is greatly increased, and the individual computes rationally on the survival conduct pattern, which is to say he enjoys himself and the society of those around him, and is constructive and creative. He is destructive only when something actually threatens the sphere of his dynamics. These engrams, then, are entirely negative in value in this stage of man's development. When he was nearer the level of his animal cousins, who have all of them reactive minds of the same kind, he might have had use for the data. But language and his changed existence make any engram a distinct liability, and no engram has any constructive value. The reactive mind was provided to secure survival. It still pretends to act in that fashion, but its wild errors now lead only in the other direction. There are actually three kinds of engrams, all of them aberrative. First is the contra-survival engram. This contains physical pain, painful emotion, all other perceptions, and menace to the organism. A child knocked out by a rapist and abused receives this type of engram. The contra-survival engram contains apparent or actual antagonism to the organism. The second engram type is the pro-survival engram. A child who has been abused is ill. He is told, while he is partially or wholly unconscious, that he will be taken care of, that he is dearly loved, etc. This engram is not taken as contra-survival, but pro-survival. It seems to be in favor of survival. Of the two, this last is the most aberrative, since it is reinforced by the law of affinity, which is always more powerful than fear. Hypnotism preys on this characteristic of the reactive mind, being a sympathetic address to an artificially unconscious subject. Hypnotism is as limited as it is, because it does not contain as a factor physical pain and painful emotion, things which keep an engram out of sight and moored below the level of consciousness. The third is the painful emotion engram, which is similar to the other engrams. It is caused by the shock of sudden loss, such as the death of a loved one. The reactive mind bank is composed exclusively of these engrams. The reactive mind thinks exclusively with these engrams, and it thinks with them in a way which would make Korzybski swear, for it thinks in terms of full identification, which is to say identities, one thing identical to another. If the analytical mind did a computation on apples and worms, it could be stated probably as follows. Some apples have worms in them, others don't. When biting an apple, one occasionally finds a worm unless the apple has been sprayed properly. Worms in apples leave holes. The reactive mind, however, doing a computation on apples and worms, as contained in its engram bank, would calculate as follows. Apples are worms, are bites, are holes in apples, are holes in anything, are apples, and always are worms, are apples, are bites, etc. The analytical mind's computations might embrace the most staggering summations of calculus, the shifty turns of symbolic logic, the computations requisite to bridge building or dressmaking. Any mathematical equation ever seen came from the analytical mind, and might be used by the analytical mind in resolving the most routine problems. But not the reactive mind. That's so beautifully, wonderfully simple that it can be stated in operation to have just one equation. A equals A equals A equals A equals A. Start any computation with the reactive mind. Start it with the data it contains, of course. Any datum is just the same to it as any other datum in the same experience. An analytical computation done on the woman being kicked, as mentioned, would be that women get themselves into situations sometimes when they get kicked and hurt, and men have been known to kick and hurt women. A reactive mind computation about this engram as an engram would be the pain of the kick equals the pain of the blow, equals the overturning chair, equals the passing car, equals the faucet, equals the fact that she is a faker, equals the fact that she is no good, equals the fact that she changes her mind, equals the voice tones of the man, equals the emotion, equals a faker, equals a faucet running, equals the pain of the kick, equals organic sensation in the area of the kick, equals the overturning chair, equals changing one's mind, equals... But why continue? Every single perception in this engram equals every other perception in this engram. What? That's crazy? Precisely. Let us further examine our post-hypnotic positive suggestion of the touched thigh and the removed coat. In this we have the visible factors of how the reactive mind operates. This post-hypnotic suggestion needs only an emotional charge and physical pain to make it a dangerous engram. Actually, it is an engram of a sort. It is laid in by sympathy between the operator and subject, which would make it a sympathy engram, pro-survival. Now we know that the operator had only to touch his tie to make the awakened subject remove his coat. The subject did not know what it was which caused him to remove his coat and found all manner of explanation for the action, none of which was the right one. The engram, the post-hypnotic suggestion in this case, was actually placed in the reactive mind bank. It was below the level of consciousness. It was compulsion, springing from below the level of consciousness. And it worked upon the muscles to make the subject remove his coat. It was data fused into the circuits of the body below the command level of the analytical mind, and operated not only upon the body, but also upon the analytical mind itself. If this subject took off his coat every time he saw somebody touch a necktie, society would account him slightly mad. And yet there was no power of consent about this. If he had attempted to thwart the operator by refusing to remove the coat, the subject would have experienced great discomfort of one sort or another. Let us now take an example of the reactive mind's processes in a lower echelon of life. A fish swims into the shallows where the water is brackish, yellow, and tastes of iron. He has just taken a mouthful of shrimp when a bigger fish rushes at him and knocks against his tail. The small fish manages to get away, but he has been physically hurt. Having negligible analytical powers, the small fish depends upon reaction for much of his choice of activity. Now he heals his tail and goes on about his affairs, but one day he is attacked by a larger fish and gets his tail bumped. This time he is not seriously hurt, merely bumped. But something has happened. Something within him considers that in his choice of action, he is now being careless. Here is a second injury in the same area. The computation on the fish reactive level was shallows equals brackish equals yellow equals iron taste equals pain and tail equals shrimp in mouth, and any one of these equals any other. The bump in the tail on the second occasion keyed in the engram. It demonstrated to the organism that something like the first accident, identity thought, could happen again. Therefore, beware. The small fish, after this, swims into brackish water. This makes him slightly nervous, but he goes on swimming and finds himself in yellow and brackish water. And still he does not turn back. He begins to get a small pain in his tail, but he keeps on swimming. Suddenly he gets a taste of iron, and the pain in his tail turns on heavily. And away he goes like a flash. No fish was after him. There were shrimp to be had there, but away he went anyway. Dangerous place. And if he had not turned away, he would have really gotten himself a pain in the tail. The mechanism is survival activity of a sort. In a fish it may serve a purpose, but in a man who takes off a coat every time somebody touches a tie, the survival mechanism has long outlived its time. But it is there. Let us further investigate our young man in the coat. The signal for the coat removal was very precise. The operator touched his tie. This is equivalent to any or all of the perceptions the fish received, and which made the fish turn back. The touch of the tie could have been a dozen things. Any one of the dozen might have signaled the removal of the coat. In the case of the woman who was knocked out and kicked, any perception in the engram she received has some quality of re-stimulation. Running water from a faucet might not have affected her greatly, but water running from a faucet plus a passing car might have begun some slight reactivation of the engram, a vague discomfort in the areas where she was struck and kicked. Not enough yet to cause her real pain, but they're all the same. To the running water and the passing car, we add the sharp falling of a chair, and she experiences a shock of mild proportion. Add now the smell and voice of the man who kicked her, and the pain begins to grow. The mechanism is telling her that she is in dangerous quarters, that she should leave. But she is not a fish. She is a highly sentient being. To our knowledge, the most complex mental structure so far evolved on Earth. Organism of the species, man. There are many other factors in the problem than this one engram. She stays. The pains in the areas where she was abused become a predisposition to illness, or are chronic illness in themselves. Minor, it is true, in the case of this one incident, but illness just the same. Her affinity with the man who beat her may be so high that the analytical level, being assisted by a normally high general tone, may counter against these pains. But if that level is low, without much to assist it, then the pains can become major. The fish that was so struck and received an engram did not disavow shrimp. Shrimp might have made him a little less enthusiastic afterwards, but the survival potential of shrimp eating made shrimp equal far more pleasure than it did pain. A pleasant and hopeful life in general, and never think we intimate that the woman stays for food alone, whatever the wits say about women, has a high survival potential, and that can overcome